Where's so I can do the images?
Oh, yeah. He's gonna get the projector up. He's getting your slides from the internet.
Oh, okay. So I don't need to do anything.
So you just gotta figure out if you gotta do forward or back. Once you figure it out, it's either one or the other. We'll get
Okay.
you forward, and then you're on your own. Then
Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Gonna adjust it because I'm tall. Oh, that didn't work. I guess this can't be adjusted. Let me move this forward a bit. All right, I'm just gonna do it like this. All right, I have a prepared statement that I'm just gonna read while we get the slides ready. What I have to talk to you about today is somewhat divergent to what you have heard, but ultimately convergent. In a way, this is the real Star Trek, a ritual journey through the stars that can be found time and time again in places no one thinks to look. We can expect to find the stars in esotericism, the occult, gnosis, and the mystery cults. People usually don't expect to find that trek in the Bible or in the symbols of modern empire. We don't expect to find these Star Treks in some of the biggest, most traumatic events of the 21st century. Yet trauma is the basis of all ritual. Trauma of loss, separation from God, defeat in war, all feed into our great stories. Trauma is the root of obsession, which is the mother of ritual. How are we doing there? Ritual in turn turns trauma into power. This is how all great empires and cults emerge. The gods feed on our pain, and then we write our tragedies into the stars. The night sky is filled with the victims of the gods, Leda, Ganymede, Orion, Antinu, and on and on and on, all of whom are written into eternity as a way for the gods to express their guilt and remorse. I understand obsession. I also have an annoying tendency to notice things. I even have an even more annoying tendency to recognize patterns, which is partly a byproduct of having worked for 35 years as a professional illustrator, 25 of which was from Marvel, the superheroes and the movies and such. So I can tell you that much of the very heavy symbolism we are surrounded by is easy to miss if you don't have the keys to the codes. But I also have the privilege to have worked in Manhattan for several years, including several years in the Empire State Building, which is just a giant obelisk on 33rd Street. Manhattan is the world's largest Masonic lodge, something that you will see if you spend your free time wandering the streets as I did. It's how I was able to see for myself that the old gods never died. They didn't even go into hiding. They became so ubiquitous, people stopped looking for them. One of the arguments that Miguel and I sometimes have is the distinction between Gnosticism and the so-called Orthodox. It's not really an argument, it's a question of emphasis. So-called Gnostics were also often members of Orthodox cults. Remember that all of these were cults up until the late 3rd century. Valentinus, the famous Gnostic teacher, was nearly made Bishop of Rome. The Emperor Hadrian wrote that there was no actual differences between Christians, Jews, and mystery cultists in Alexandria. They all crossed over and often joined each other's cults. So what I want to show you tonight is that they all got their scriptures from the same place, the stars. They trace their origins to the most important innovation in the Western religious and cultural history, the Greek or Greco-Babylonian star map. The stories all emerge from these constellations, the only difference being the specific cultural gloss they painted onto the night sky. So with all that in mind, let's start breaking some very ancient codes. Okay, this is the Greek map. This is the map that everyone in the ancient world, the ancient Western world, understood and worked from. This was based predominantly on the Babylonian zodiac, but all these other constellations were Greek innovations. I would argue that this is the most important document in the Western world and the basis of all Western religion, myth, and symbolism. It even leads up to our superheroes and to science fiction, and is the basis of most of our rituals, even into the Bible. This map was developed by Eudoxus in the 4th century BC, and later came to be known by Hipparchus in the 2nd century BC, and was formalized by Claudius Ptolemy in the 2nd century AD. And this right here that's the neighborhood we're going to concentrate on. That's the focus of all of this. Okay, this is the traditional Babylonian star map. I don't know how well you can see this, but if you look at that circle, you're going to see a lot of the familiar constellations of the zodiac. We have Capricorn, Sagittarius, Scorpio. They had a little bit different things for Libra and Virgo. Libra in their map was the scales, were the claws of Scorpio. And then they're on, we'll see. Most importantly too, though, is Orion was known as the true shepherd of Anu. Okay, this here is the Royal Arch, and this is the neighborhood that we're going to spend a lot of time looking at tonight. I would argue that this neighborhood is more important, was more important to the ancients than the zodiac itself. This was of paramount importance to many religious and mythological traditions. Let's start, okay, Sargon of Akkad was the world's first emperor. He united the city-states of Sumer and Akkad into a single empire that spread out from Mesopotamia. And his story is going to be very familiar to people because a lot of people have said that Moses took his story. I don't believe that he did. I think that they were just working from the same star map and the same understanding of the stars. So what we see here is that Sargon claimed to be born of a priestess and was raised by the drawer of water, and he became a gardener, and then Ishtar made him king. So what we're doing here is that we're working up the galactic plane from just south of Hydra up to galactic center. And this is something you're going to see again and again. This is a very important trip, Star Trek, so to speak, for the rulers and high priests to take. I'm frozen. I'm frozen. Who's going to help me? Ivan? Ah, there we go. Okay, this is the same neighborhood. We're going to see, a lot of you are probably familiar with the Egyptian mythology of Osiris and Set and Isis and so on. Osiris is Orion, just south of the ecliptic. Now Osiris is important because he's the god of the underworld. He's the god of the waters below the horizon being the ecliptic, okay? But he's also, he rules the winter sky, so he's associated with death and renewal, okay? And right next to Osiris, you see a little bird there. That's the kite that Isis becomes to impregnate herself with Horus. And Horus you see just a little bit north of here. Now this is from the Dendera zodiac. This is a much different star map than what we're used to. There are some very similar, you can see Pisces up here and Taurus, but they had a much different understanding of the night sky. And we also see some surprising associations, Thoth being associated with Iran, and Algol in modern-day Perseus in the Falcon. Okay, so what happens is that Set, the brother of Osiris, assassinates him during a dinner party and scatters his body parts. Isis gathers the body parts and impregnates herself. And Horus, in the form of Hippocrates, represents kingship. And he's taking the same trip through the galactic plane that we saw with Sargon. And he's right north of Libra here. And he's right north of Scorpio and Galactic Center. Now, Scorpio represents the stinging insects that sent into the marsh to kill Hippocrates, Horus the child. Okay, this is the nursing of Horus the child, Hippocrates. This is what I call Heaven's Gate, because we have Gemini, which we're going to see was Boaz and Jachin, represented in this character on the right. And there we see Thoth. We see him in his familiar ibis form, but he has the ram's horns, so he's representing Aries. Isis has her cow horn headdress here, so she represents Taurus. Now, this is actually meant to be looked flipped. All right, this is kind of upside down. This is mirrored because this is a different view of the sky. But the papyrus reeds are the nebula of the galactic plane or the Milky Way. Now, here's Horus assuming kingship. So he has made it through the royal arch. He has gone from Orion and Gemini all the way through the Milky Way to the other side to Galactic Center. So we see him representing the equinox. We see this stand here representing the flood season. We see Thoth representing the summer solstice, Ra representing the winter solstice, and Isis representing the spring equinox. And then we see him holding representations of Leo and Capricorn. This is just a straight up star map. Could I, water? So when you look at a depiction like this is a map. This is like actually a map. This is how they understood these things. Thank you, sir. Okay, we're back at Osiris, which is Orion, beneath the ecliptic, Taurus, which is Isis, Horus, Algol, Eye of Horus, in Perseus. And then Seth, this is going to be interesting because there's always been a mystery who Seth represented. And I'm going to show you exactly what the Set animal is. This is a mystery that's been going on for thousands of years. But Apep, or Apophis, is actually the galactic plane beneath the ecliptic. This was very mysterious to the ancients. This was seen to be the underworld, and that's why we see Osiris he judges the souls that descend into this realm of the dead. Now let's get into Set, because Set's a very interesting character. He's a very misunderstood character. People sort of associate him with Satan and so on. What Set did is that he protected the gods, which meant the constellations above of the ecliptic and above the ecliptic, from Apep, or Apophis. And Apophis is the representation of the Milky Way beneath the ecliptic. And we see Ra on his boat, and that's going to be another decoding we're going to look at. Okay, so people have always looked at Set and said, they don't understand who he is. They don't understand what it represents. That right there, on the right, that's the Set animal. And this has always been a mysterious figure to Egyptologists. But what I would argue right now, and in the context of the Apophis story, is that Set is a combination of Lepus and Lupus. Okay? They didn't understand those, they didn't have those terminologies. But we see here the hare, which is Lepus, cutting the neck of Apophis, which means the zodiac is cutting off this mysterious underworld, this band of the sky that the Egyptians thought would destroy the sun, that would devour the sun. And then we see another representation of a hare god confronting the snake there. Okay, I'm kind of proud of this. This is the Eye of Ra, which people have been arguing about for forever. What the Eye of Ra is that it's the bark, the solar bark of Ra, combined with the tail of Scorpio. And I'm going to show you exactly how this was constructed. But we see the representation of the ecliptic, which is the mascara, the equator, which is the eyebrow, and the southern Milky Way, the southern galactic plane, in that mysterious little notch there. Okay, so here's the Egyptian sky map. And you can almost see it. If you look at the bark of Ra, you're almost starting to see the shape of an eye take form. And here it is right here. So we understand the bark of Ra as Ophiuchus, or the serpent holder. And you can see it right there. So if you just connect those dots, you see the eye within Ophiuchus. And you combine that with the tail, and you just draw that line right down from the center of the eye, representing the Milky Way. So it's a very ingenious code that people, again, have been arguing about, but it is just the combination of these two constellations. Okay, so let's take this into the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible. I would argue that the Hebrew Bible was written a lot later than people understand it to have been written. I think it was written after the Greek star map, Eudoxus star map, was created, okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about the fall, but I just want to show you the characters that we're playing with here. Serpent is Draco, God is Cepheus, Eve is Cassiopeia, Lilith is Andromeda, but she's also the first Eve, and Perseus is Adam. And then, of course, we have Leviathan, which is Cetus. And this is what I call astrogenesis. This is the expulsion from the garden, the fall of man. So here's our basic story. The serpent lingers around the garden. God is Cepheus. Cepheus means gardener, okay? So this is the war in heaven. This is the war between Draco and Cepheus, all right? And this is at the pole, and the forbidden fruit is the pole star, okay? Eve is the first one to be seduced by the serpent because she's the closest, all right? Now, the knowledge of good and evil in this context is being within and without the galactic plane, that nebula that they call the garden, the tree of life, Jacob's ladder, the stairway to heaven. I mean, there's just any number of terms for this. But God is within, Cepheus is within and without the galactic plane, okay? So he has the knowledge of good and evil, all right? Draco is just totally outside of it, so he's just evil, right? Eve and Adam are in the garden, okay? They're naive. They don't have the knowledge of the sky outside the galactic plane. Now, this is a really interesting story, and this is going to solve a really interesting mystery, I think. So God here is walking in the garden with Adam and Eve, okay, walking in the cool of the day. And that's Perseus and Cassiopeia, who are within the galactic plane. The first Eve is Lilith, and this is something that's only in rabbinical and extra-canonical literature, but she gives us a very important clue as to the story. Okay, here it is right here. The Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man and brought her to the man. So this is the first Eve. This is Lilith, Andromeda, who's falling. You see how she's falling from the sky. We see there the rib, her foot is coming out of his side. That's Eve being created out of Adam's rib. Now, the fall of man is the Perseids. The Perseids is an annual meteor shower that seems to emerge from Perseus and Cassiopeia. So that's Adam and Eve falling from the sky. And we know this terminology because the ancient Israelites associated the Nephilim with the Orionids. They called it Nepal, to fall away. So this is the fall from heaven, the fall from the garden, as represented by the meteor showers. And then what happens in the story is that God blocks the gate to the garden with a cherubim, okay? Now the cherubim are the winged constellations of Cygnus, the swan, Vega, the harp. So the angels play the harp, right? So this is the arm of the what I call the royal arch, the galactic plane, leading back down to galactic center. And what we have guarding it is three winged constellations: Aquila, Cygnus, and Vega. And again, that's the angels playing harp. And the flaming sword is Deneb, okay? Deneb is a variable star that blinks on and off. Now, there's a very mysterious quote in the Bible that's called the Proto-Evangelon. And it's like, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and it shall bruise thou shalt bruise his heel. And we see that right there. This is Hercules, who plays a number of different characters in the Bible, stepping on the head of Draco, right? He's bruising Draco's head, and Draco is bruising his heel. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, I don't know, for 10, maybe a dozen years, the Kepler mission was focused on the gates of heaven, from whence the fell came, right? Why were they focused in that exact point in space? What was so interesting to them about that, okay? Now, another interesting thing is, and this will sort of get into the deeper stuff in this, is that the British government undertook what was called Project Cygnus, which was wargaming a coronavirus epidemic in 2018, all right? There were a lot of strange things that happened with swans. The queen swans were killed. They were poisoned. We had swans being beheaded, all right? There was a lot of strange ritualism associated with Cygnus. And Cygnus, that's the flaming sword that guards the gate of heaven. Now, we see this symbolism again. This is Jacob's ladder, the angels going up and down the ladder into heaven. And there's our winged constellations, Aquila, Lyra, and Cygnus, ascending and descending to Cepheus, the gardener, God, the garden. Ophiuchus, okay, is Jacob. He's a number of different characters, but in this instance, he's Jacob. When he's lying on the stone that's the body of Scorpio. That's Jacob's pillow. Now, this is really interesting, too. So, if you read the Bible, the stories just don't make any sense. I mean, they're very odd, and they seem to be almost kind of random. But if you look at the stars, if you weigh them against the stellar symbolism, all of a sudden they make perfect sense. So, Jacob wrestles the seraphim, the flaming serpent, all night, okay? And the seraphim, the angel, dislocates his thigh. And you see that right there, okay? In Ophiuchus. And he's wrestling the flaming serpent, which is serpents. Serpents, Serpents kaput and serpents kata, okay? So that is how we know that's Jacob. And we see his thigh being dislocated by the flaming serpent. You know, another great story, the Tower of Babel. Nimrod has been associated with Orion, and we're going to see that he's associated with building soon. But the tower is the back door to Cepheus, okay? So the way to heaven through Galactic Center is guarded by those flaming cherubim, Aquila, Cygnus, and Lyra. He's trying to go in through the back door. Right? He's coming up through the gates of heaven. He's coming up through Auriga and Perseus, up into God. So that's his sin. That's Orion's sin, is to try to gate crash heaven through the back door. Now, we talked about Sargon and how the story of Sargon being floated in the marsh, in the reed boat, being discovered by the princess, sounds very much like Moses. Well, it is the same story, except for it takes place in a different part of the sky. Okay? So the setup in the story is the king did not know Joseph. Joseph is represented by Taurus, which is on the other side of the galactic plane, right? And we know this because Taurus and Orion have the conflict with Scorpio. So the king is there, and we see Corona Borealis, and that represents the king, obviously, right? The Hebrew babies that are thrown into the river is the tail of Scorpio, right? Those are the little babies being thrown into the river, and that's the celestial river of the galactic plane. The two midwives from the tribe of Levi are the two scales of Libra, okay? The Levite woman and the 3 months, we see the 3 months right here, is Virgo. So the Levite woman gives birth to Moses and hides him for 3 months until he ends up at Sagittarius. And he starts to ascend up the celestial Nile, which the people who wrote Exodus understood was the bark of Ra. And there probably were even maps at the time that were using the bark of Ra, the solar bark of Ra, as Serpentarius, Ophiuchus. And then it just ascends up the galactic plane. So there's the reed boat, the bark of Ra. Baby Moses, we saw before, is Hippocrates on the north end of Libra. He's in the boat, okay? The princess is the princess, is Andromeda. Her helpers are the stars of Pegasus that go into the Nile to fetch the baby. And then she goes to Moses' mother and asks her to nurse Moses. And if we go all the way up there to Cassiopeia, one of the main stars in Cassiopeia is called the breast, Shadir. It's called the breast. So that's the wet nurse. And then it's just a journey. It's just a journey through the galactic plane. Because Moses then becomes Perseus, right? So this is one of the reasons why I think that this book was written during the time of the Ptolemy dynasty. Because some of it I skipped over because there's a lot of it, but there's a lot of symbolism where the Prince of Egypt is Greek. And in this case, it's Perseus, okay? He comes across the Egyptian who's beating the Hebrew, right? And that is Auriga, who is the charioteer who carries a whip. We're going to see that again. So the whip is beating the Hebrew, right? And then he comes to the two Jews who are fighting. That's Gemini. So it's all just one step after another. There's no jumps or leaps around the sky. It's all just boom, 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 okay? And whenever you see 7, just look for the Pleiades, okay? So he comes into the land of Midian. Whenever somebody goes into the desert, into the wilderness, wherever, they're traveling away from the ecliptic and the galactic plane, okay? So he goes into Midian, the foreign land of Midian, where he's getting towards Cetus, right? So this is a dangerous place for him to go to. And he meets the 7 sisters of the priest of Midian, again, Pleiades, who come into contact or conflict with the shepherds, right? They're being pursued by the shepherds. Pleiades are right next to Aries, okay? So the symbolism is very clear. And the well of Midian is the river, okay? That stretches from just below the belt of Orion, right there. That's Aradnus, okay? That's the constellation of Aradnus. Okay, so that's Moses' story. I mean, I could have gone into the 8 plagues because the 8 plagues are also directly correlated to the symbolism of the constellations. Well, let's go to Jonah and the whale, because if you've ever read the book of Jonah, it makes absolutely no sense. You don't understand like why any of this is happening. So what happens is that God, Cepheus, tells Jonah, Perseus, you know, the hero, the running hero, again, who takes a number of different incarnations and a number of different mythologies, to go to Tarshish, okay? But Jonah instead runs, because Perseus is the runner, to Jaffa, okay? And hires a sailboat, okay? Oh, no, I'm sorry. God wants Jonah to go to Nineveh. I'm sorry. Jonah wants to go to Tarshish, okay? So we see the symbolism is very clear here. Jaffa is where the story of Perseus and Andromeda was said to take place, where Andromeda is rescued from the sea monster. That took place in Jaffa in ancient times. Tarshish, that's a really interesting decode here, but that is Pegasus, the square of Pegasus. Nineveh, okay, Nineveh in modern-day Iraq is the house of fish, okay? And I'm going to tell you exactly what the meaning of all this is. I'm sorry, dry mouth. But he hires the boat, and I think this is very clever, because in Mesopotamia at that time, the sails were triangular, and that's triangulum, the triangle, and then the boat is the shape, you know, so it looks like a boat and a sail. So Jonah is supposed to go to Nineveh, right? He's supposed to descend to the ecliptic and go to the house of fishes. But instead, he hires a boat at Jaffa to go to Tarshish. Now, this is where we understand the meaning of Tarshish. This is the high priest. This is the vestments of the high priest in the book of Exodus, okay? And what this is that the turban is Cepheus, okay? The breastplate of judgment is the torso, of Pegasus. And then the knotted rope, the knotted belt, is the knotted belt of Pisces. So we see this, it's a direct one-to-one correlation. It's Cepheus, Pegasus, and Pisces. And that's the sacred vestments of the temple. Okay, so the story goes that Jonah hires the boat and he is thrown overboard during a storm and he's swallowed by a giant fish or the whale. And the whale clearly is Cetus, right? So he's supposed to go to Nineveh, which is the fish, and he's thrown into the ocean and is swallowed by Cetus. And then he's vomited up onto dry land, which means he's back on the ecliptic, okay? So he went below the ecliptic where all the danger is, right? The underworld, which everyone found very mysterious, and he spat up onto the ecliptic, or the zodiac. So God tells him to go back to Nineveh, the house of fish, which in this instance is Pisces austrinus, the southern fish, right there, okay? And he spends 3 days traveling through Nineveh, the house of fish, and that is Aquarius, Capricorn, and Sagittarius. And he goes to meet the king, which is the southern crown, okay? So over and over again, we just see these simple one-to-one correlations here, where he's swallowed by the fish, spends 3 days, all right, which is the 3 signs of the zodiac that take us to the king, which is Corona Australis. And then the story ends very strangely. So Jonah preaches to Nineveh, and then he goes and hides from the sun, that the sun has become very bright. And God provides him with a plant to shelter him. But the next day, a worm comes and eats the plant. Oh, and also the king of Nineveh sits in ashes. So whenever you see ashes, you know that you're looking at the nebula of the galactic plane, okay? So the king sitting in the ashes, don't see it as much in this depiction here, but the king sitting in the ashes is Corona Borealis in the nebula of the Milky Way at galactic center here. And Jonah's shelter is Ara, or the altar. And then we see the worm being Scorpio's tail. So they're repurposing these constellations again and again to fit these narratives. But they don't make any sense. The story ends with Jonah and God having a discussion, and God basically ends the story by saying, what should we do with the 120,000 people of Nineveh who don't know their right from their left? Meaning, their ass from their elbow. Now, when we see the 120,000, what we want to focus on is the 12, okay? Because what this story is really about, what I believe the story is really about, is that it's about the priesthood observing the change from Aries, the age of Aries, into the age of Pisces. So this whole narrative is constructed to explain that in this secret code. Most people, common people, are not going to understand this, but the priesthoods are going to understand what this is about. And this is announcing that they're talking to each other in this secret code about shifting from the age of Aries to the age of Pisces. The fish. And this is, where we start to see the fish symbolism in the New Testament. Okay, so this is another star map here. So we see the winged constellations, Cygnus and Lyra, Cepheus, which in this instance is Christ. The Milky Way is the smoke, the sacrificial smoke coming up from the altar, and the altar is there as Ara, the altar. This character here is Ophiuchus, which follows in the footsteps of characters like Jacob and other biblical characters. And then the urn from which the smoke all emanates from is galactic center. So we see the incense decanter here at the bottom, which is the nebula arising from galactic center. Now this is the Good Shepherd, Auriga. These depictions are essentially identical, okay? Holding the lamb or the kid here, and then holding the bridle or the staff, okay? So this is the Good Shepherd. This is the one, and we're going to see how this really plays out in real time. This symbolism of Auriga, which is a five-sided polygon taking you to heaven. And that's why no one gets to the Father but through me, okay? Because the way to heaven is blocked near Galactic Center by the seraphim, so he's going to take you to heaven as Auriga. We won't get into this. This is the Lord's Prayer, but there's a lot of steps here that take a lot of explanation. But I'm working from the original Lord's Prayer in Greek, which is actually different than the one people are familiar with today. But suffice it to say that it's taking you through these steps here. Now, there are a lot of sayings in the Gospels that are very mysterious. In this case of Luke 10:18, "Behold, I have given you authority to tread on snakes and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy." Okay, so there we are. Ophiuchus, who's there's the serpent's constellation, which runs through both sides. He's controlling, and then he's also treading on Scorpio, is the enemy, because Scorpio descends far below the ecliptic. Now, this all started for me with Revelation, because when I read Revelation, I'm like, this is a Gnostic text. This does not read like Orthodox Christianity, and in fact, many church fathers didn't want it in the Bible, all the way up to Martin Luther, okay? Many of the early church fathers did not want this book. They probably understood all the symbolism was Gnostic, okay? But all the monsters are all star maps. So what we see here is the four horsemen. "Behold the white horse, he that sat on him had a bow." I mean, enough said, right? That's Sagittarius. Now this is more interesting. "There went another horse that was red, and the power was given to him that sat thereon to take the peace from the earth." That's Antares, okay? And Antares is right in the center of the galactic plane, okay? And he's taking peace from the earth because it's Antares, right? Ares, god of war. This is why I'm saying this is all people working from Greek understandings of the stars. "Behold, a black horse that sat on him had a pair of balances," clearly Libra. And this is a little more interesting too. "Behold, a pale horse," right? The William Cooper book. "His name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him," okay? So death is the spear of Centaurus. So why does hell follow with him? Because right next to Centaurus is Corona Australis, and that is the king of the underworld. All right? And that's all below the ecliptic, leading into the mysterious southern skies, which most people in the Mediterranean had absolutely no concept of. This is another one. I couldn't believe it when I did this. This is the locust. So when I was a kid, you'd hear like these preachers saying that the locusts were the Beatles, or they were, with the guitars and stuff and the long hair, or they were attack helicopters and so on. And people have been like saying, oh, it's some sort of chimeric beast, it's some CRISPR, DNA recombination. What actually it is, it's a star map. Again, when opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like a gigantic furnace. And in this case, the abyss is Draco, because Draco is the devil, the serpent. On their heads were crowns like gold, of course, Corona Borealis. Their faces were as men, Boötes. They had the hair of women, Coma Berenices, which is in many star maps is just a wig. The teeth were as lions, of course, Leo. Breastplates of iron, the cup, Crater. The sound of their wings, Corvus, the crow. Sound of many chariots, of many horses, taking us back to Centaurus. And this is again what I'm saying, like the king of the underworld. They had a king over them, the angel of the bottomless pit, which takes you right to Corona Austrine. and tails like scorpions, which is obviously Scorpio's tail. So, I mean, it's just one after the other. I mean, these are the descriptions verbatim. And what they're doing is that they're following the sky from Draco down to the underworld, you know. And I think that this is the Draconids, which is another meteor shower. So in Revelation 12, the dragon is hurled from the sky by Michael, and I think this is a representation of the Draconids. But again, this is all just going step by step. You know, there are no leaps around. You don't need like a secret decoder ring. It just goes one by one. The two witnesses, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, both saw themselves as the two witnesses of Revelation, which are Gemini, of course. The beast that comes up from the abyss to smite them is Cancer, because Cancer is a crab, which is an animal that actually comes out of the ocean onto the land, right? Now, this is the woman of Revelation 12. The woman cries out in pain, Virgo, and you see that she's kind of on her back in relation to the ecliptic here. The dragon stood in front of the woman about to give birth so that it might devour her child. That's serpents right here. She gave birth to a son, a male child who was snatched up to God. That's Boades. And Boades is also associated with shepherds, right? The woman fled into the wilderness. Again, the wilderness is off the ecliptic. So Virgo is taken off the ecliptic, and she's going through Ophiuchus and serpents, right? And the place prepared for her by God there's our character, there's our priestly character of Ophiuchus again. The dragon saw that the dragon saw he had been hurled to earth by Michael. He pursued the woman. That's the tail of serpents. The woman was given the two wings of a great eagle. That's Aquila, again, which is one of our seraphim guarding the gates of heaven. And the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman, and that's clearly Aquarius. So what this story is about is Virgo coming loose from her place in the sky and traveling through the wilderness, which means off the ecliptic, where she, encounters all these monsters and such. Again, this is another one that people have sort of been puzzling over for quite some time. I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea. Again, that's Cancer, the crab. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard. His feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth was as the mouth of a lion. So we see here where Cancer meets the mouth of the lion. Leopard is, this was just an asterism. This Leo Minor hadn't been created yet. It was an asterism within Leo, but it was like the little lion. And then the feet of the bear, which is Ursa Major, right here. So, it's really very simple. These are all star maps. I think that the depictions of times in the year when they believed these bad things were going to happen. And this is the Scarlet Woman, the Whore of Babylon, riding the Scarlet Beast, which is, again, we saw the Leo-Cancer cusp. Coma Berenice is Mystery Babylon. In ancient star maps, she was depicted as Isis with Horus or Hippocrates on her lap. But the story behind Coma Berenice is that she was a queen of Egypt who offered her hair up to Aphrodite so that her husband would win in battle. The king would win in battle. Now, shaving your hair was considered very shameful, and prostitutes would have their hair forcibly shaved or forcibly cut. So that's why we have the association of this wig with Mystery Babylon, Coma Berenices. Sits beside many waters, Hydra, that's what Hydra means, and the cup of abominations is Crater, this big, big gulp cup there. So this is the fall of Babylon. in Revelation 18. Therefore, shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her. I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Witch, shall bewail her and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning. The smoke of her burning, again, anytime you see smoke, ashes, dust, anything like that, it's the Milky Way, okay? That's the smoke of her burning. God is casting judgment. Cassiopeia is falling away from her. Kings of the earth standing afar is Perseus. So what we're seeing in the Bible is a very Greek understanding of the stars, not even a Babylonian understanding. So I think that most of the Bible, when you get away from maybe some of the lineages and so on, or some of the chronicles, were written fairly late. I think they were written after Eudoxus had finalized his map. Therefore, I sit as a queen and am no widow and shall see no sorrow. And that's, of course, Cassiopeia sitting at her throne. And then again, we see this here. Now, the merchants of the earth, Auriga, again, they repurpose these constellations to fit the narrative. And in this case, Auriga, again, a Greek understanding is Myrtilus, son of Mercury, merchants of the earth. I mean, literally merchants of the earth. And this is the final fall. Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea and said, with such violence shall the great city of Babylon be thrown down, never to be found again. Again, Andromeda, chained to the rock at Jaffa. Okay? That's her millstone. That's part of the constellation. All right? And again, she's falling away. So this is not only the whore of Babylon. They would have understood that this is Lilith. They would understand that this is the first Eve, okay? The one that came from Adam's rib. So all this symbolism is highly complex, but it's actually ingenious. Again, this is showing you that it's a star map, okay? Kings of the earth, Revelation 18:3, that's Perseus. Babylon sits a queen, 18:7, Cassiopeia, God on his throne, who's just sort of looking over it. Tied to the millstone, 18:21, the smoke of her burning, 19.3. The Lamb of God shows up, that's, of course, Aries, 19:7. The white horse, 19:11. And then the bride, well, actually, I went a little bit out of order here, but the bride, which is the church, is 19.9. So this is the Star Trek, okay? This is a ritual travel through the constellations. I don't know if, your average citizen would understand this, but the priesthood would understand this. The priesthood understood what all this stuff meant. They knew where all this stuff came from, and it was a secret language. And this is why in the Gospels, Jesus talks about, well, I teach the public, the hoi polloi, the great unwashed, one lesson, but you're going to learn the real lessons. And it was probably the star magic. Now we come to the great cult that is still with us very much today, the Mithraic cult and the mysterious Tauroctony. Again, we see the royal arch, the sun and the moon. Mithras is Perseus, slaying Taurus, okay? Obviously Gemini. And here we see the same symbolism that we see in Egyptian depictions of Set, right? So that's the galactic plane below the ecliptic, which is the snake, again. Same symbolism as Apophis. And then Scorpio here, he's supposed to be, biting him in the privates. And then the dog licking the blood of the wound, and that's Canis Major. So again, you just see this over and over and over again, and it's all just like a very small part of the night sky. Again, mostly the royal arch of the galactic plane in between Orion, the gates of heaven, Gemini, and galactic center. Okay. Now we get to the people, the fine folks who have kept the symbolism alive for us, and that is the Freemasons. And this is Solomon's Temple. Boaz and Jackie, and of course, Catherine Pollux. The Temple, House of David. And when we saw David with the crook and the lamb, the same thing that the depictions of Auriga. Capella is Solomon, the son of David, right? And those are the kids. That little asterism there is called the kids. And Hiram Abiff is Orion. We saw Hiram Abiff associated with Nimrod. So it's the same thing, the builder character, because what they're building is the back door to heaven. These are the wounds, the famous wounds of Hiram Abiff. Betelgeuse, which is the wound on the neck, Maisa, the wound on the head, and Bellatrix, the wound on the chest. Okay. We see this all throughout Masonic symbolism, which we're going to look at next. And that's where the church steeples come from. The Freemasons who built the cathedrals built Cepheus right into every church in the world, more or less, right? See it right there. That's Cepheus. A lot of people have said that the church steeples were supposed to be obelisks. No, it's Cepheus. I mean, it's plain as day. You see this over and over again. And again, this is the Freemasons who understood this star magic. And the Freemasons, you just gotta love this. The Freemasons put the square and compass in the sky, right? Triangulum Australe and Circinus. These exist to this day. These two constellations are still there. That's like audacity. You really got to admire the cojones there. Now, I want you guys to pay close attention to this because this is going to take us up to one of these modern day traumas that I'm talking about, okay? This is the stairway to Sirius. Now, when you're a kid, when you want to find the Sirius in the night sky, they tell you to look for Orion's belt that points directly down at it, okay? So the first degree Masonic tracing board, there we go, the 3 stars of Orion's belt taking us to Sirius. Now the interesting thing is that at the bottom, we have representations of the wounds of Orion and his belt. So this is all Orion down here, and that's all Sirius down here, the blazing star. And in some depictions of Canis Major, it looks like an anchor. So when you see the anchor coming down from the blazing star, that's Canis Major. This is the second degree tracing board. Once you crack this code, it gets very simple. Again, this is the back door to heaven. They know they can't get into heaven past the seraphim, right? So they go the back door, which is through Catherine Pollux, Auriga, standing at the bottom there. And that's the stairway to heaven, okay, right? Perseus stands at the gate there to the inner sanctum. Cassiopeia is that upside-down bird, okay? And then the G, I believe that the G, the Masonic G, is Gardner, Cepheus. Because that was created by English speakers, right? So it seems pretty obvious to me. And this is the third degree tracing board. Again, it's the same trip. It's the same trip. We have Hiram's wounds in the unworthy craftsman's tools at the bottom, okay? We have Gemini in those 2 mirrored symbols right there. I'm going to show you an interesting thing why Taurus and Algol, or Medusa, are the skull and crossbones, okay? We have Aries. There's a great meme where you see like that sort of hockey stick upside down. It's like, Greeks be like, oh yes, a goat. So that's Aries, Triangulum. And if you have anybody, I don't know if there are any Star Watchers here, but there's Cassiopeia right here. And that takes you to the Garden of Cepheus, okay? And so what had happened is that there was something called the Anti-Masonic Party in the early 19th century. And actually, John Quincy Adams had run for president. After he served as president, he ran as their presidential candidate. This was the most successful third party, I think, in American history. So what happened is that all the Masonic lodges and colleges just changed their branding. And one of them, of course, is Skull and Bones. So if we look here at Taurus, there's our crossbones. See, and there's the Pleiades, right? You see it right there. It's kind of like a wobbly X. That's the crossbones. The skull is Medusa, okay, which at some points was a separate constellation within Perseus. And the coffin is Auriga. I mean, you can just see the shape. It looks like a coffin. So when Skull and Bones initiates go into the coffin and confess their sexual secrets, it's just playing out this star map. I don't know how many understand that, but it couldn't be plainer. Okay, here's another one. You know about the Goat of Mendes, okay? The infamous inverted pentagram with the goat's head that you see on 1,000 heavy metal album covers. So Cetus is like the bad dude. This is Leviathan. Cetus is a Leviathan, right? And in modern constellation maps, that pentagram, or that pentagon right there, that inverted pentagon is the tail of the whale. But in older star maps, that was the head of Cetus, Leviathan. And here it is. I mean, it tells you right on what this thing is about, because those letters in Hebrew spelled out Leviathan. So Leviathan is the head of Cetus, right? That's our inverted pentagon, which becomes a pentagram. But it's also in conjunction with Aries, okay? And I just connected those stars there so you can just see what we're looking at here. And I think what the symbolism here is that Leviathan is leading you away from God, okay? Because it's leading you away from Cepheus at the North Pole of the sky down into the underworld. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. And then Aries becomes like an Antichrist kind of figure, because Aries is associated with Christ as the Lamb of God. And then we see that same symbolism encoded into Washington, D.C. So people look at this and see it as like the goat's head, you know, the inverted pentagram stuff. Really what it is that it's the head of Leviathan. So it's empire, right? Leviathan is the empire. That's exactly what the symbolism is actually saying. You know, these guys aren't devil worshippers. They understand what this stuff really meant. And then this is Capitol Hill. Okay, now people always look at the center there, at the owl in the center, but the owl is flying. See the wings? People never make that connection for some reason. But if you look in the center, that's, you know, it's like a horned owl with the two eyes and the beak and the 2 feet. And then it just surrounds the Capitol building. It surrounds Capitol Hill. Now, Capitol Hill takes its name from the Capitoline Hill in Rome, which was originally the Saturnian Hill. And that's where, in the old days of the Roman kings, where human sacrifices were made to Saturn, or Cronus. So we see here the symbolism of this owl taking flight. Now, this constellation no longer exists, but this was called Noctua, and it's the tail of Hydra, okay? And again, here's Centaurus, which is, you know, that's the guy who we see in Revelation takes you to hell. Now, we see this all over the internet, this eye symbolism, and nobody seems to understand what it is. What I think what this means is that it's the binary nature of Algol, because Algol is a star that blinks. It's seen to be blinking in the night sky, and that's why it became famous. That's why it became the wounded eye of Horus, because it was not a constant star. But it's the same thing as Deneb, the flaming sword, in Genesis. okay? But here's the eye in the triangle right here. Algol triangulum. Right there. The people who do this stuff, again, I don't think they have any understanding of what they're doing. You know, I mean, most of these celebrities and stuff are just doing this because they're told to. But that's what we're seeing here. It's Algol, Rashagul. That's what Algol is translated from, and triangulum. Okay? And again, here's the Eye of Ra. So we have the Eye of Horus, which is Algol, the wounded eye, the blinking eye. And then, again, the Greeks obviously understood, they saw Aquila as a buzzard, right? And they saw serpents as a cobra, but it's all the same, you know, it's all basically the same symbolism. So here we see, I mean, this is really fascinating because, again, this is a very small part of the night sky. The three eyes, the three famous eyes, Eye of Ra, Eye in the Pyramid, and the Eye of Horus. Right in the same neighborhood, you know? And there's only a couple constellations separating them. But this is where all that eye symbolism stems from. They're all star maps, again. And I'm going to show you why the eye in the pyramid on the dollar bill is Lyra very shortly. Okay, so Lyra was really important to the founding fathers for some reason, and you can see that the depictions of Lyra were just adopted into the Great Seal, okay? The harp became the shield, all right? And let me just show you this. It actually was Lyra in earlier depictions of the Great Seal. Okay? This is the first American passport that was made, and it's from the Library of Congress. What's sitting right in the middle of it? Lyra, Vega, right? Part of the Summer Triangle, Altair, Vega, and Deneb. Three brightest stars in the summer night sky. And there's Vega right there, off the left shoulder of Lyra. People don't, I didn't know this until I looked it up. I'm like, wait, are you kidding me? I mean, this is amazing. Early flag was also Lyra. It just could not be more obvious. Again, you don't need like a secret decoder ring. I mean, it's right there. And there's actually records of this. Okay, so this is a really interesting story. So I think it was in 1774. Okay, so John Adams, the second president of the United States, was tasked to create the Great Seal of the United States, okay? And we know this is the obverse with the eye in the pyramid. Now, if you look at the earlier depictions of this, it was still a pyramid with an eye, but it wasn't glowing and it wasn't separated. What happened in between when that was designed originally and then the version that we know more specifically, the Ring Nebula in Lyra was discovered, 1779, by a French astronomer, okay? And that's incorporated, I mean, that was seen as a sign. That was, you know, the signs in the heavens, that was the strongest sign that they could possibly imagine. I mean, a new nebula shows up in the night sky, and that was the Ring Nebula, which is right below Vega. Okay, so this is how the Great Seal, the eye in the pyramid that you see in like all over the internet was actually created. Again, there's the Ring Nebula between Sulafat and Sheliak, and then we have Vega up there, and you know we know Las Vegas, which is really, it's not whatever they say it is, it's Vega. And then you just start to connect the dots, okay? You connect the dots between Vega and the main body of Lyra, and then Delta Lyra over there, and you already see it, right? The unfinished pyramid, right there, okay? Now, the interesting thing about this is that every time I would look at the Great Seal, I would be like, that perspective is really off. That's not what the Great Pyramid, I mean, the Great Pyramid looks like it's half as deep as it is wide, and it's because it's following the star map. And there it is. It aligns perfectly. And Chelyabinsk, and this is a little different because, you know, they were working off of earlier star maps, but Chelyabinsk marks the top of the pyramid, and Sulafat, the floating triangle of the Ring Nebula. And that's the Ring Nebula right there. It's right where it should be, okay? And the cornerstone of the Great Seal is Vega, okay? So if you understand Freemasonry, you understand how important the cornerstone is. So Vega, again, which we saw in this early official documentation of the United States with Lyra, becomes the cornerstone of the Great Seal. And again, this is the same neighborhood that the Kepler mission seemed to be very fascinated by, you know, this area of space between Cygnus and Lyra. I mean, like, what was so interesting about that? I don't know. Now, this is really disturbing. Back in 2018, in March, there were a series of bombings in Austin, Texas. And I remember looking at the map, and since my eye is sort of acclimated to the symbolism, for some reason this mad bomber was setting off all his explosives in positions directly correlative to the major stars of Lyra. Why was he doing that? Okay. Yeah. But there it is. And an interesting thing that happened less than a month after those bombings is that Trump bombed Syria during the Lyrids. And the Lyrids are the meteor showers that take place coming from the constellation of Lyra. This is about a month after those bombings started. Yeah, okay, there you go. Dollar bill sign is another one, okay? Whenever you see any kind of controversy about ancient symbolism and scholars sort of disagree on it, just start looking at the stars and you're probably going to find it. Okay, so here we've got the galactic plane, which is this big S, right? And it's dissected by the equator and then the ecliptic, okay? So there's our S, right? And there's the equator, and there's our bisected S, okay? And then we connect the cardinal points of the ecliptic right there, okay? Let me just rotate that for you guys. There's a dollar bill sign right there. So we have the galactic plane, which is the giant S. We have the ecliptic and the cardinal points of, no, I'm sorry, the equator and the cardinal points of the ecliptic. And there it is. It couldn't be plainer or simpler. And again, I mean, we're talking about Freemasons who understood the stars, who were obsessed with it. And we see all over their symbolism that people still argue about because they just don't bother to look at maps of the sky. This is a little bit, and this is obviously speculative, but I can do that. So this is the Barron bull market. Now the interesting thing about the Barron bull market is that Ursa Major points down towards the ecliptic, and then the bull, Taurus, points up. So when the market's down, like Ursa Major, it's bear market. When it's up, like Taurus, it's a bull market. So, I don't know, it seems pretty simple to me. Here's how it all started. So I was working in Lower Manhattan in September of 2001, and I had that Tuesday off. And I said in many interviews, I still don't remember exactly why I had that day off, but I was working on Lafayette Street, so I'd take the path into World Trade Center every day, and I was also there on the weekends because a friend of mine lived on South End Avenue, and we were working on a movie script. But when the trade towers were gone, I was looking at the World Financial Center, and I realized, oh crap, that's the stairway to Sirius. So we see the 3 steps, the 3 stars of Orion right there, Pyramidion, the dome, and since you can't have like a star-shaped roof, it's a pentagonal roof or a five-sided roof, truncated pyramid, and that's the glyph of Sirius. And in the center of that is the Royal Arch. Right? So there's our Royal Arch again. And then because the trade towers were gone, we could see that there was the Monolith Hotel that was specifically modeled after the Monolith in 2001, right there. That's called, they call it now the Millennium Hotel, or the Millennium Hilton. So 9/11, okay. This is something, after 9/11, my old office was across the street from Masonic Lodge, and they were having a blood drive because we thought that like 10,000 people were buried in the PATH station. So I went over to give blood, and there was nobody there. And there was an old grandfather clock in the lobby that had Gemini and Auriga right on the face. This was September 17th. It was my wife's birthday, 6 days after 9/11. And I looked at that and I said, that's interesting. What's even more interesting is, that jumbo jetliner that, produced, was able to take, the most impossible maneuver you can imagine and drive itself into the Pentagon, matches the kids, which break the Pentagon of Auriga. Okay, there's Capella, which is Solomon, right? And you see two different versions of it. It lines perfectly. And the thing that I always find interesting is that these stars, the kids, this asterism within Auriga, they use letters to identify the stars, and then they also use letters to identify this, this 747 that drove into the side of the Pentagon. Yeah, that's pretty interesting, right? Now, here's another interesting thing. I talk about the Heaven's Gate, the real Heaven's Gate. Again, the Pentagon, right? And the Twin Towers. Now, during the first event on 9/11, the moon was dead center in Heaven's Gate, right in the galactic plane, in between the twins, Boaz and Jachin, and Solomon's Temple. Amazing coincidence. We don't have to go into this, but this is just an interesting, the moon tarot all aligns to the same piece of real estate in the sky. And same thing, but also I found this interesting. Sirius was the only dog killed on September 11th. His badge number was 17. 17 was the day of Osiris's death. Osiris is Orion. Just a fascinating cascade of pure coincidence. And, this is a little overkill, but this is just showing you, the alignments. The Wall Street Bull is Taurus. Aradnus, the river, is also the Hudson. It's just over and over again. And lo and behold, so the gates of heaven are crashed by 17 men carrying box cutters, hijacking a jumbo jet, and the gates of heaven are taken down. The guardians of the gates somehow fall and replaced by one trade center, or one world tower, or I don't know, some stupid name. But it's clearly just a depiction of Cepheus right here. And then, lo and behold, another miraculous coincidence here that we have one World Trade Center or one trade tower or whatever, aligning with Cepheus, the gardener, the god, the footprint of one of the towers there matching Pegasus, and then the new World Trade Center PATH station, which is birds in flight, just miraculously aligning with Cygnus. And this is even more interesting. The National September 11th Memorial aligns to the cardinal points of the legs of Pegasus right here. All right, we don't have to go into this stuff, but this is, I don't know if this started me on it, but I just remember looking at Beauty and the Beast and we see these main characters lined up where, Corvus the bird, the feather duster, Crater the cup, and the tea kettle there. And the interesting thing about these two characters is that, Sextans is depicted on the clock face, and then Cancer is depicted when that character has his arms up like this. Again, I don't think we're going to really have time to go into this, but this is Las Vegas, and we talked about Vega and Lyra, and shortly before Las Vegas Harvest 91 Festival, this gentleman here, named Orion Krause, beat his family to death with a baseball bat right in the shadow of Fort Devens, which was formerly known as the U.S. Army Intelligence School. And we see that Mandalay Bay aligns to Cancer, and then, of course, the Sphinx aligns to Leo. And on and on and on. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I guess this is the harvest chapter of Revelation, and that sort of aligns to this map right here. But it's interesting because it starts at Pegasus, which was known as the paddock, right? So this is from the Babylonian map. We see the horse in the field, right? Paddock, right? And the Stephanos, the crown, Stephen Paddock, right there in the night sky. Again, amazing coincidences, just stranger than fiction. This was Stairway to Sirius that was split up between Obama and McCain's campaign logos. And then our friend Joe Biden reenacting Orion and the Canis Major and Canis Minor, you see right here. And in case you didn't get that reference, he did it again, and he brought his wife, who was a Gemini, and they went to the seaside, which is the galactic plane, the Milky Way, the river of the sky, I mean, you name it. And again, here we go. This is the war in heaven. That's Cepheus wearing the crown. That's God, Draco, Satan, the devil, the serpent, whatever you want to call him. This whole big drama. It all sort of starts or ends where it starts, I guess. So there you go. If you don't understand any kind of symbolism of this nature, just get out your star map and you'll probably figure it out pretty quickly, because it really doesn't take much digging to figure out what all this stuff is. That's just, I always say that historians don't look at star maps and astronomers don't look at history. If they put the two together, they'd probably figure it out. It really doesn't, it's really not very hard. So there we go. Our God is full of stars. My God is full of stars. Do we have any time for questions or no questions? Okay. Thank you. What's that? Thank you. Thank you.
Only scratches.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I didn't bring.
Yeah, there's so much more. Read The Secret Sun. Well, thank you very much, Chris, and thank you. Thus ends our first day. We have the cocktail and food party at the around the pool. So join us, and if you have questions, ask Chris, Gordon, and we'll continue tomorrow at 9 o'clock with a very cool Gnostic documentary, the Q&A where we can pick this up, and some other really great speakers. So thank you for the first day of Astronosis.